Welcome back to our second segment of Battle of Midway. Today, we talk about the key players involved in the battle.
During the Battle of Midway, at 2:14 p.m. on June 4th, 1942, on board carrier Yorktown, a Japanese bomb scores a devastating hit. In the No. 1 fire room, 37-year-old Chief Water Tender Charles Kleinsmith, appointed to that rate only 3 days before, remains at the only undamaged boiler. Despite the red-hot boiler casing, the noxious fumes from ruptured uptakes, and imminence of an explosion, Kleinsmith supervises his 6-man crew in keeping that boiler under steam with 2 burners still going, maintaining the ship's vital auxiliary power as Yorktown sailors repair the damage to the uptakes for boilers 4 through 6. His courageous and efficient performance ultimately enables the carrier to go from dead in the water at 2:40 p.m. to 20 knots, the speed necessary to launch fighters, at 4:27 p.m. Kleinsmith, by his professionalism and tenacity, exemplifies the spirit of Midway.
Now let's check back in with Mr. Bob Cressman.
Yes, sir, and I think, you kind of encompassed everything, and I know you mentioned Admiral Nimitz and, of course, Commander Jimmy. Were there any other, key players that maybe don't get as much recognition or, certainly pivotal in the battle?
Okay. Well, I think you have a question here on the players. You say the chemistry and working relationship between Nimitz, Fletcher, and Spruance.
Yes, sir. As well as I would attempt to say Admirals Isoroku,
Yamamoto, right? Yamamoto, Kondo, and Nagumo. Yes.
And I think that's exactly how I would pronounce them as well.
Okay.
I'm sure I would have said those perfectly accurate.
Okay. Well, it's totally different because Yamamoto is the fleet commander. Kondo, I think he was one of the fellows. So I'm operating kind of off the top of my head here. He had one of the forces, but it was not engaged in the battle. Nagumo has commanded. I've heard him described as the Japanese Bill Halsey, but somehow it doesn't quite match because he was. If Halsey were in charge of Japanese carriers at Pearl Harbor, he probably would have attacked a third time instead of leaving it at 2. Nagumo was not really excited about the whole Pearl Harbor business because if you look at a map, you can see why. I mean, it's a long way from Japan, and he thought at the time of the second strike on Pearl on December 7th that he'd sort of pushed his luck far enough, and his job was to get the carriers back intact. So that's what he was bound determined to do. So that's what he did. And they, instead of going on for a third strike and hitting, say, the infrastructure of the base at Pearl Harbor, hitting the fuel tanks, the repair basin, going back and pounding the airfield some more. But he figured, no, we've done enough. Because they actually expected to have to fight their way in. They were very surprised that there were no fighters up to contest them, that the anti-aircraft didn't open up immediately. Although by the time the attack was fully developed, the reaction time of the American sailors and gunners on the ships at Pearl surprised them. And I've read one account where the Japanese who was talking about it said, it's doubtful if our Navy could have responded as fast. So, in other words, and that goes to training. That goes back to training that Admiral Kimmel had prepared the Pacific Fleet and was preparing them aggressively. I mean, they were conducting a lot of operations from Pearl, gunnery exercises, anti-submarine exercises, carrier actions, really drilling and preparing for war. And that, I think, is frequently lost in the whole Pearl Harbor controversy of, were they ready? But Kimmel's focus was on training, and he kept up the routine, and I think we owe him a great debt for preparing the fleet as he did, although he was relieved of command after the attack. I think he should have been relieved, but not disgraced. I mean, that's the problem. That with Pearl Harbor, you have people who are who are disgraced. And I think the scapegoat concept doesn't hold up because the scapegoat is someone who's blameless. And they certainly, the Hawaiian commanders, had their issues and things that weren't done. But that's another story. You talk to me about that in December.
Yeah.
Tune in for part 1.
Yes, sir. It'll be.
It's kind of like a Star Wars movie. Part 1 and part 2. But I think Kimmel's performance in preparing the fleet was significant. One that was continued by Nimitz. Nimitz was quite a man. He seemed to be rather laid back, but he was really a very sharp guy. Knew how to pick subordinates. Knew how to let his people do their jobs. Delegated to the people he knew could do the jobs. His key task force commanders at Midway were Frank Jack Fletcher, whose reputation has been superbly rehabilitated since the late 1940s when Admiral Morrison did a hatchet job on him because of the people he talked to who didn't like Fletcher. There were various things, and why was Fletcher put in charge of one of the Wake Island Relief Expedition task groups? And people had said, well, it's because of seniority. He was obviously senior to this guy, and so they, Navy tradition, seniority. That's why he got it. Well, actually, he hadn't. That wasn't the reason. And I found a letter from Admiral Kimmel where he was saying, we need a man with guts, and we need a fighter, we need a leader, and that's Frank Jack Fletcher. I said, whoa, that totally caught me by surprise. And I used that in my Wake Island book, Magnificent Fight, to refute the traditional line that was, he was big for seniority. And Kimmel had said he was we need a strong, vigorous leader. And that's how he described Fletcher.
Fascinating. That's all the time we have for segment 2 of Battle of Midway Podcast. Thank you for listening.